Our Bible word is Luke 10 verse 33. But a certain Samaritan, as he journeyed, came where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. So this is Luke and his gospel. And this section comes from what is known as the travel narrative. And that is Luke 9 verses 51 to chapter 19 verse 27. And the emphasis of these chapters is Jesus' resolve to go to Jerusalem. And he increases his resolve to go to Jerusalem, because this is the place where he's going to die. And this is also the place from where salvation will go out to the whole world. So there are repeated references in these chapters to Jesus going to Jerusalem. And it's also here where there's lots of parables and teaching of Jesus aimed at the disciples. And there's a big concern here for the poor and the outcast, the outsiders. And this section of the gospel is also called by some theologians as the gospel for the outcast, because the outsiders are made to be the insiders. It's the outsiders and the outcasts who receive salvation. So this is the travel narrative, and part of the outcast or the outsiders are Samaritans, and they also belong to the people of God. And of course we are familiar with the parable of the Good Samaritan. If I can maybe give an equivalent of that so it becomes more relevant to us and the shock effect it would have had back then. So it would go something like this. There was a man, he drove in a dangerous neighborhood, and there were people who hijacked him and they beat him up and they threw him out of the car and they drove away with his car, and he was left there for dead. And a bishop drove by, but the bishop was late for his service. So of course he didn't want to miss the service, so he drove just past because he must go conduct the service. And then an apostle drove by, but he was also late for his service, and it was also a dangerous neighborhood and he didn't want to stop there. So he said, no, I'm going to go on, I must go conduct service. And then a Muslim drove by, but the Muslim stopped there. He got out of his car in this dangerous place and he helped the man into his car, and so he put himself at risk and he drove him to hospital, and he again put himself at risk because he said, yeah, I give you 50,000 rand deposit, and whatever it costs to heal him or for him to recuperate, I will pay that back to you when I come back again. So that's the kind of shock effect. It's this outsider who shows compassion and mercy. So the people who would have listened to this, they thought, a Samaritan? A Samaritan is the hero of the story? How can it be? And Jesus says, yes. I mean, the Samaritan is the one who showed the nature of God. He's the one who showed compassion and mercy. So this parable is also about doing, because there are two questions that are posed by this lawyer. A lawyer came to Jesus, an expert in the law. So if we go to the first question, in verse 25, he asks, Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? Then Jesus asks him, well, what do you think? So he says, well, you must love God, love your neighbor. And then Jesus says, well, do this and you will live. So the emphasis on doing. So the first question is, what must I do? That's in verses 25. And then Jesus responds also, you must do this. That's in verses 25, 28, and 37. So it's about doing. What must I do to inherit eternal life? But then now the lawyer comes with a second question. Who must I show love? How far does this extend? So if we go to verses 29, and who is my neighbor, he asks. I must love my neighbor, but who's my neighbor? How far must my love extend? Because there are many foreigners and Gentiles, etc., that live on the land, and we're under Roman occupation. So it's, who must we show love? So Jesus tells the parable of the Good Samaritan. He tells him of the Levite and the priest that passed by. It was the Samaritan who came to this man's help. And then Jesus asks him, So which of these three do you think was neighbor to him who fell among the thieves? So obviously the lawyer says, well, it was the Samaritan. Then Jesus says to him, go and do likewise. Remember, it's about this doing. What must I do? Jesus says, or the man asks, and then Jesus says, well, do this. Be like the Samaritan. And remember the two questions that is posed by the lawyer. If we go to verse 25, it says, Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? And then the second question posed in verse 29, and who is my neighbor? So the essence of Jesus' parable is that second question is irrelevant. Cross it out. It's a non-issue. He comes back to the first question that was asked. Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? And then it is, well, show the love and compassion that the Samaritan showed, because he embodies the love and mercy of God. This is what you must do. Who your neighbor is a non-issue. Being a good neighbor, that is what counts for you to inherit eternal life.